Welcome to What's Going On, the weekly podcast and videocast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of What's Going On. I'm Pastor Katie here at First United Methodist, and I'm glad you could join me for this episode. First, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who watched the episode last week and reached out with your condolences and your kind words. It means a lot. I know that it was a pet that we lost, but it was still, as many of you said, pets are like members of the family, and so it means a lot. And I just want to say thank you, and thank you from my family as well. This has been a rough winter. I don't know about anybody else, but our family has been dealing with a lot of sickness and just all kinds of things going on this winter, and then dealing with the weather on top of it. It's been a lot. I think we've had influenza A, we've had RSV, we've had strep throat, go through multiple members of our family this year. And it feels like just when maybe we're getting on the mend, something else crops up and we haven't had, and then you add on top of that cold weather, you add on top of that different schedules for different things. It just feels like since Christmas, we haven't really gotten into a good rhythm as a family. And I don't know about you, but I feel like it's taking its toll on us as a family. I am someone who I do not have a regular 9 to 5 job. That's not the way this job works. There's a lot of ways that I sort of structure myself. But I do really like having some stability in my life. And this winter just feels like we have not been able to have that. And it got me thinking a lot about like when I don't have that sort of rhythm in place, it really throws me for a loop. If I don't have the rhythm in my sort of like day-to-day routine, if I don't do the things that set me up for success, my days are usually really off, and my weeks are off, and my months are off, and my seasons are off. And I've learned this over the years about myself that if you ever hear me say that I'm like a super laid back, go with the flow kind of person, I am not telling you the truth. That is not who I am. I am very much happy in sort of a structured life because I find in structure, that's where I find freedom. Because without the structure, I get really anxious. And if without sort of certain rituals or routines in place, things can break down pretty easily for me. And what I'm finding is that it's true for my family as well. And I find this to be true both in my like physical life. Like if I don't, I schedule out when I go to the gym, and if I don't make it, that's like a domino effect for the rest of the day. I go to the gym first thing in the morning on the days that I go, and if I can't make it for some reason, if I'm out of town, if I'm sick, if I've had a rough night, I find that the rest of the day is off because I've not then done the routine or the things that I go to the gym, I take a shower, I do this, I do get the kids ready, and so on and so forth. And if one thing falls off of that, then the rest of the day is just kind of it's going to be a day. It's going to be different. And I find that's also true in my spiritual life as well. That there are certain rhythms of our spiritual lives that I think are set up and have been set up over time that really help us. And if we don't live into those rhythms, I think we get off course, we get off kilter, we get off track in our faith. And so there's big macro rhythms in the life of the church. And again, the whole point of church is to be supportive in your relationship with the divine, right? Like church is not a goal in and of itself. Church is meant to be a structure and a rhythm and a support system in a community that allows us to live out our best lives. And whether or not we use that is up to us. But I think that trying to live a spiritual life without that is way more difficult. And we have 2,000 years of church history and experience and learnings that help us and that give us the structures that we have in place today and the rhythms that we have and the sort of seasons in the life of the church that we have that over time we have found are best suited to help a person um, maintain faith, to grow in faith, to live out their faith. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about um, what sort of spiritual rhythms look like and how they might be helpful to us and how it might be helpful to you if you do not recognize these or practice these, that it might be something worth trying or looking into. And we're coming up on a season of the church, which I'll talk about, that is a great opportunity to try or recognize or incorporate new things into your spiritual life. And so let me talk a little bit um, macro, or maybe let me start in the Old Testament, really, because God designed things to be in rhythms for our benefit. And for the most part, most of us ignore it completely. And the first is from the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, and that's where we have the account of creation. Now, I believe that Genesis chapter 1 is a hymn, it is a poem, it is not literal in what it is telling you. I don't actually believe that God created the world in 6 literal human days. I do believe that that structure of Genesis 1 is meant to convey to us um, kind of overarching themes and connections between the way things are created and that everything is intentional and that everything is good. Um, but one of the things we see right away is, and on the seventh day, God rested, right? This is the origin of Sabbath in the Hebrew religion and tradition and culture. They still maintain Sabbath to be on the seventh day, and they are very intentional about what it means to rest on that day. And so, for whatever reason, I get a lot of Orthodox Jew Jews on my social media feed teaching about Orthodox Judaism and answering questions. And I find it fascinating and I keep watching them, which is probably why I get them. But they have a lot of really specific rules around what is considered work or not work on the Sabbath because it is so important. That's one of the 10 commandments that we remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And I think for a lot of us, that sort of understanding is that means I go to church. But even now, for a lot of us, that's optional, right? Um, but really, a Sabbath day was meant for rest. It was meant for renewal. It was meant for spiritual connection and connection with each other. And so, unless it was an emergency, unless it was to maintain life, so things like you got to feed your animals on the Sabbath, like that still has to happen. But that all the other things were not as important. And there could be a day, and there should be a day where you rest from that stuff. And and I think that is an important rhythm that God designed for us that many of us have completely ignored, right? Like we do not have, and I think in our culture, in American culture, in Western culture especially, right? There is a hustle culture. There is a value of being busy and involved and doing things and being part of things, and we do not take time to rest. And maybe even we have in our brain somewhere, even if we can't articulate it, this idea that resting is lazy and that it is almost a sin to take time to do nothing because you should be always doing something. You should always be productive. You should always be involved. You should always be, you know, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to get your kids in this, you got to go here, you got to visit them, you got to make money, you got to. I mean, like that's how it feels, right? And so to rest is counter that, and it feels hard. It's hard to prioritize, it's hard to do, even if you say, okay, I'm going to just sit down and rest. your body might be resting, your brain's not, right? Like we do not have built into our life anymore a rhythm of rest, renewal, reconnection. And that starts at the very first book of the Bible. So that's like just a day, like on a weekly thing, way that God has designed us, um, that we have lost. We have lost that rhythm of our life. So what would it look like for us to recapture that rhythm, um, to have a more healthy life and a healthy balance? And I say that as someone who is not good at it herself. Uh, Most of the time when I'm talking to these things, I'm looking at myself and I'm like, I'm talking to Katie on this one. What does it look like to prioritize Sabbath and rest and renewal and what fills your cup? And not just like fills my cup, like I'm going to have a brownie, because I mean, that definitely makes me feel better. But how do I connect with that part of me that is connected with the divine, that reminds me who I am, that reminds me of my value and my worth, and that I am worth um, taking this time to let my body rest, to let my mind rest, and to be cared for by God. Um, we also have, uh, but we can go crazy with that too, right? Like we can go the opposite and get kind of worked up on what it means to take Sabbath and creating rules around it and then enforcing that on other people. We don't want to do that. What we're trying to do is find healthy rhythms that support the abundant life that God is calling us to. And I think one of those is Sabbath. Sabbath means connecting with the divine, which is, and Christians do Sabbath typically on Sundays, and we do that because of the resurrection of Jesus. And as a celebration of that, that is when we gather, that is when we take that time to rest and for Sabbath. Now, it's very easy for life to encroach on that, right? And we experienced that in my own family as well. This year, one of our boys is in wrestling, and there's a lot of youth wrestling tournaments that happen on Sundays. And we've had really hard conversations about how we're going to manage that and what that looks like and what that means, so that we're still in a good rhythm as a family, because it is so easy to fall into a pattern when you allow different people to tell you what you need to be doing and what you need to be a part of, and what's the best thing for your kids and what's the best thing for you and how to set them up for success. And you should really be a part of this, and you should really do that, and you should really get involved in this, and oh, you need to volunteer for, like, it's just, there's always going to be demands on you. There's always going to be people who want something from you. And so it becomes your job to create the boundaries and your job to uphold those boundaries, even if it means that other people are going to be disappointed or upset or not understand. And I feel that because it's hard. It's hard to do, but I cannot betray um, who God made me to be, and the rhythm that God has designed for my life, but also for the life of my family. Like I have to be the one who models what that looks like for them, that it's okay to say no to things. It's okay to spend time uh, doing nothing. It's okay to rest. And it's okay to prioritize the things in your life that remind you who you are, that fill your spiritual cup, because you're going to need that. And again, you are the only person that can make that happen. And so, uh, again, just in that one way, right? But in the Old Testament, we also see not only like a weekly rhythm, a spiritual rhythm, but we also see a variety of festivals and holidays and things come up that mark the calendar for Jewish people. And we see this beyond just the Bible. We see in every culture, right? In every religion, there are markers that pass seasons, there's celebrations, there's different things that happen throughout the year, and that creates a rhythm of life. We have that as well in our own culture. And we have that as well in the church. And some of our cultural celebrations originated out of the church, and some of them didn't. Um, and sometimes it can, again, be easy to default to our cultural way of doing things rather than looking at the wisdom that's been passed down throughout the centuries in the church for how to structure our lives in the passage of time and understanding that. So I want to talk a little bit about the church calendar. So just like we have a calendar, I'm going to pull. I I'm old school. I like having a paper calendar. So we have our regular calendar, but we also have a church calendar. The church year starts, well, actually it changes when it starts, but it starts the first Sunday of Advent. Advent is the season that leads up to Christmas. And so depending on when Christmas falls, which is always December 25th, the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas Day, hold on. So in Advent, the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas Day are the 4 Sundays of Advent. If Christmas Eve falls on a Sunday, that is the 4th Sunday of Advent. That happened not 2024, but 2023. Confused a lot of people. So the first Sunday of Advent is the first day of the church calendar. That is where we mark our new year. Now, do we celebrate that? Not in the same way that we celebrate New Year in our culture, but I do try to like make a nod to it usually. Um, so Advent is our first season, and that is our preparatory season for the coming of the Christ child. You will recognize Advent by some of the rituals that we do during that season, including lighting the Advent wreath. Usually it's during the Advent season that we are in full force celebrating Christmas in our culture, right? The kind of, I like to think of it as we have separate holidays that have the same name that are happening around the same time. And so Christmas is one of them. We have church Christmas, sacred Christmas, and we have secular Christmas. Sacred Christmas is a season that begins Christmas Eve night. Usually for us, that's when we have our worship service. Prior to that is Advent. We have Advent most of December, and then Christmas that starts Christmas worship and goes through Epiphany. Secular Christmas starts, depending on who you are, anywhere from November 1st until after Thanksgiving-ish or the beginning of December. And secular Christmas is, Santa Claus and the elves and red and green and all of that fun stuff. And don't get me wrong, I love both Christmases for different reasons. And I'm someone who is a firm believer in I don't put up my Christmas tree until after Thanksgiving because Thanksgiving deserves its due. But you do you. But to me, that is a separate thing than our sacred Christmas. So we have Advent, and then we move into a season of Christmas. 12 days of Christmas, that's the season of Christmas. That goes until Epiphany. Christmas, I have already mentioned, we worship on Christmas Eve, that we have sacred rhythms and rituals that go along with that, right? We have the candle lighting. How many of you that if we didn't hold candles or the light up candles that we use right now on Christmas Eve, it wouldn't feel like Christmas and your Christmas celebrations would just feel off because that is a rhythm. That is your brain knows that that's what's supposed to happen, what's supposed to come, and it sets you up for Christmas. At least that's the way it is for me. Epiphany, we've started doing Star Words as part of our ritual for Epiphany. So that's, again, that marks the end of the Christmas season with the coming of the wise men. And then in the church, we go through a little season, what we call ordinal time or common time. And it means that we're not in a special season of the church. Ordinal means like counting. So it'll be like the first Sunday after Epiphany, that kind of thing. Just a brief season because, and well, I mean, it can last anywhere from like a month to 2 months. And again, it depends on where Easter falls. And Easter falls based on the lunar calendar because Easter is in conjunction with the celebration of Passover, and the Jewish people use a lunar calendar and not our Western calendar. So prior to Easter, we have another preparatory season in the church, and this one is called Lent. Lent begins with Ash Wednesday. Now, in some traditions, in Christian traditions, prior to Ash Wednesday, they will celebrate Mardi Gras or Carnival or Carnival or something like that. And Carnival is basically preparation for Lent. So part of Lent is a very serious preparation time because it is a time of introspection, but it's also a time typically marked by fasting. And so, over the centuries, as people were preparing for the Lenten fast, they needed to get rid of all the stuff in their house that they weren't going to be consuming during Lent. And not everybody had, until really recently, historically, the ability to save all that stuff. So they had to use it up. And it was the fats, it was the, you know, and so they would have kind of big parties to sort of our last hurrah before we go into this 6-week season of penitence and reflection and fasting. And that's where Mardi Gras and Carnival and all those things originated, was the precursor to Ash Wednesday. And so you will hear about like Fat Tuesday. Why is it called Fat Tuesday? Is because people are using up the last of the fats that they have in their kitchen because they will be giving that up for the season of Lent. I was in a church that had a tradition where they made pancakes because that's a great way to use up those kinds of things. So Ash Wednesday then begins the season of Lent. Ash Wednesday this year, just for your knowledge, it will be on March 5th. We'll have a service here at 7 o'clock. That service is marked by a ritual of the imposition of ashes, is what we call it, where we put ashes on our forehead and the sign of a cross. It is a reminder both of our mortality, that we have only one life to live here, and it's important that we are using it appropriately, and then also as a sign of repentance for the ways in which we have fallen short of living our life appropriately, and then entering into a season of, one, repentance, two, recommitment, self-evaluation, so that when we come to Easter and what Christ has done for us, that we come fully aware of our need for it and ready and willing to accept it. So the Lenten season lasts for 40 days, not including Sundays. And then we move into Holy Week. This is probably the biggest, highest holy time in the church calendar. And so that starts with Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday is the mark in remembrance of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem for the final time. People were laying down palm branches as he rode in on a donkey, so we call it Palm Sunday because of the palm branches. Usually we have some sort of nod to that in our worship service. And then that is the beginning of the final week of Jesus' life. On that Thursday is when Jesus would have been celebrating the Passover with his disciples. We call it the Last Supper. It would have been the last supper he would have shared with them. That is where we have Jesus' command for Holy Communion. And so in that worship service, which will be at 7 p.m. on Maundy, Thursday, we celebrate both communion and we do foot washing because that was another thing that Jesus did that night. And so it is a remembrance of the commands that Jesus did that night. And then on Good Friday is remembering Jesus' death on the cross. And so we have a service for that as well. These are incredibly holy services. They are incredibly difficult to hear. They, I think, weigh heavy on us, as they are meant to. These are not easy things that Jesus went through, and it's important for us in our spiritual rhythm to participate in the recollection of these things. One year, my son Ethan was born in April. He was born the week before Holy Week, and so I missed out on all of these services that year because I had a C-section and I was still recovering and I had an infant. I mean, I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing anything. And I remember that year in particular feeling off for the whole year because I did not go through that rhythm of Holy Week and Easter. And it was just like I was missing something. I wasn't anchored in the same way. After Good Friday, then we have Easter Sunday. That is our big celebration of Christ is risen, and that leads us into our Easter season. That is 5 weeks. Um, and it's a joyous, joyful time. And Easter is one of, our biggest services. And again, Easter's like Christmas in that I feel like there's two holidays happening at the same time, right? There's sacred Easter and there's secular Easter. Sacred Easter is the celebration of Jesus rising from the dead and his power over sin and death, and the good news that is for all of us. And then there's secular Easter, which is all about the Easter bunny and chocolate, and again, I love both. But to me, in my mind, they're just two different things that are happening at the same time, and that's okay. Um, Easter season, like I said, lasts for 5 weeks, and then we go into Pentecost. Pentecost is a one and done holiday in the church, and that is the coming of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles as they kind of inaugurate this new era where the Holy Spirit and the people of God take on the mantle of Jesus' ministry and to spread the good news and to offer new life to all people, not just the Jewish people, but all who would believe in who Jesus was and what happened and what Jesus offers us in the kingdom of God. And then we go back into a season of ordinary time, ordinal time or common time. And that lasts all the way through the summer and into the fall until we get to, well, we do have like a special Sunday in October. That's World Communion Sunday that we participate in, where every church, theoretically, every Christian church celebrates communion on that day as a sign of unity, which I think is pretty cool. And then it'll hit again back at Advent. And so we are in currently an ordinal time, but we are gearing up for Lent. And for me, this is my favorite time in the church calendar. It's my favorite time in my spiritual rhythm. It's really important to me. And I hope that it is for you. And I hope that you don't overlook what this participating in these things can do for you. One, in having a regular rhythm of Sabbath and rest and renewal and worship, but also recognizing these larger patterns. And again, the point isn't I go to church because church is a good thing to do. The point is the rhythms of the church, the worship, the corporate worship, the community is there to support you in your faith and in your journey and in your walk. We talked in confirmation last night about the grace that is offered through the people in your life that can help guide you along and help you understand your faith, and that's what's happening for them right now. And they kind of recognize the different people in their lives and the way that those people have brought God into their lives and help them on that journey. That's the whole point of the church, is to guide you along. And there's so much wisdom and there's so much um, goodness that can come out of it. But for so many people, they sort of view the church and our rituals and our rhythms as sort of like a smorgasbord a little bit of like, well, I'll participate in this thing and I kind of like that thing and I like that thing, but otherwise I'm not going to really do it. And it doesn't really do anything for us when we do it that way. And then people start to think, well, the church is sort of like irrelevant because they've never really fully given themselves over to the system. It's kind of like, you join a gym and you go like once every 3 months and you're like, well, the gym is pointless. I go to the gym, it doesn't do anything for me. Well, no, because you haven't actually committed to it. You haven't actually put in any effort or any intention to it, right? Um, And so the way that the church is set up is a gift to us if we allow it to be. It is meant to support us. It's meant to carry us through our lives and to be a touch point for us and to bring us back to who we are and to remind us and to give us, again, to fill our cups and to give us that time and that space to be aware of God's presence and to be aware of what God is inviting us into and to propel us again out into the world. I think too often we have allowed other voices and other people and other sources of authority to dictate to us who we are and what we should be doing and what is the best for us. And then when we get to the church, we evaluate the church based on those other things. And it really needs to be flipped around. Really, all of those other voices and all of those other things should be evaluated based on what we believe God is calling us to and the wisdom that we are given through the church of the best way to live a holy life. And again, maybe your goal isn't to live a holy life, but how often do I hear people who what they really want in life is to feel like they matter, to have a legacy, to feel like they're doing some sort of good in the world, that they're raising good people, that they just want to feel connected and seen and heard? That sounds like exactly what the church does. I think whatever your deepest desire is, quit chasing after all this other stuff. The church has that answer, but you have to be willing to be a part of it. You have to be willing to give us some time, willing to give us some of your energy and some of your presence in order to start to strip away some of those other things. And really, when you start to live into the rhythms that God has ordained for you, the person, the God who created you, the God who designed you, the God, as Psalm 139 says, knit you together in your mother's womb, God designed you. Don't you think that that would be the best source of finding out how to live your life the best? Because probably the reasons that you are struggling with the things that you are struggling with, including burnout, including stress, including anxiety, which again are things that I experience as well, is because we are trying so hard to control our own lives, to find solutions to problems that we have created, that we have put so much value on other people's opinions about what we should be doing, that we've lost our way. And the best way to come back home is to come home to the church. Now, I'm not saying the church is perfect, but it is, in my estimation, the only place that's talking about these things and the only place that's going to give you space and time to find out who you are and to pour into you God's love and grace. And if you feel like I've been gone too long, uh, I'm too angry at things in the church, I don't know how to come back, they don't even want me, like, I want to remind you of a story that Jesus told about a son who demanded his inheritance from his father and went off and did everything he thought was the right thing to do and everything he deserved and everything that would make him happy. And what he found out, it didn't. And he realized that the life that his father had set up for him was a better life than anything that he experienced. And so he came home ready and willing to lower himself, to be a servant, to work. And the father, when he was still a long way off, ran and embraced his son and threw a party and said, "This son of mine who had died has come, is alive again. He's come home. I promise you, that if you show up in our church, that we will be rejoicing. We'll be so glad to see you. Whatever has happened in the past is in the past. Today is a new day. And today is a great day to start a new rhythm of life that will lead you and guide you into the best, most fulfilling life that God has planned for you. So I hope that you, even if you don't believe me, why don't you come try it out for yourself? See if I'm making it up or not. And I'll tell you that the people in the pews next to you, none of us are doing this perfectly. We're all struggling. So don't look at them and go, well, it didn't work for them either. Because what we find is we're all in this journey together, and we're all working on it together, and we're all finding this peace together, little by little, bit by bit. But we want you to be a part of it too. So until next time, God bless. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Going On, a video and audio podcast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. We'd love to have you join us for worship on Sundays at 10 a.m., either in person or via our live stream, which can be found at our website, www.firstumcyankton.org, or by searching First UMC Yankton on YouTube.